This is the Cursed Tag, and if that's not enough reason to tune in, then I don't know what is. This story comes from Morocco. A long time ago in a small town called Tafraud, which is in the Anti-Atlas Mountains, there was an old woman who made amazing food. We don't know much about her life, where she came from, or why she was called Lala. The name Lala means elderly woman, so maybe she was called Lala Halima out of respect. And we don't know because nobody ever asked. Nobody ever talked to the old woman unless they had to. She kept to herself. She was incredibly lonely, but that's all she had. She did have some friends though, the local jinn. Now this might scare you, but please remember, not all jinn are evil. Just like humans, they can be anything. Some are benevolent and kind, and some are malicious and spiteful. These jinn loved this old woman, and she loved them back. Every day she would leave little gifts of milk and honey and mint tea by her fireplace, little treats for her friends. And one thing that the jinn loved more than anything else was to watch humans suffer. They would tell her stories of pain and loss and misery. Oh, they were her favorite stories, and they told them in such great detail that sometimes it was hard to distinguish reality from fiction. So instead of just listening to the grim tales, the old woman decided to take action. She started experimenting in the kitchen. She wanted to create a dish so exquisite, so perfect, that anyone who ate it would feel compelled to share their sadness with her. Now, her specialty was chicken tagine. First, she would make the most fragrant broth imaginable with onions, ginger, garlic, and saffron. Then she would add plump, succulent chicken thighs and the fattiest bits of lamb she could find. Next, she would toss in some dried apricots and olives. Then a splash of lemon juice, just enough to make your lips pucker. And finally, a pinch of salt. All these ingredients bubbled together under the watchful eye of the old woman. The aroma alone was intoxicating. As the broth thickened, she would add a generous helping of butter, just to coat the insides of the tagine. Finally, after hours and hours of simmering, she was ready to serve. She would ladle the buttery broth over chunks of bread, almost like a thick soup, and then she would place it all under a handmade ceramic lid, sealing in all those tantalizing flavors. And no one could resist eating it. Anyone who smelled the dish could unhelp but stop whatever they were doing and gobble up every last drop. People called her magic touch baka, meaning blessing. For many it was the best meal they ever tasted, but the old woman knew better. She knew that it wasn't her skill nor the hours she spent slaving over her stove that made the dish so irresistible. No, it was her jinn. Every ingredient she used was imbued with just a hint of their power, and when combined, they created something truly extraordinary. Not just a culinary delight, but a gateway to the darkest recesses of the soul. For you see, every time someone ate her tagine, they felt compelled to reveal their deepest grief. Farmers burdened by crop failure, young lovers betrayed by circumstance, mothers mourning the loss of a child. They flocked to her doorstep seeking solace in her delicious stew. And the old woman listened patiently. She soaked in their misery, relishing every tearful tale. Their sorrow was her entertainment, their pain her only joy. But eventually her fame spread far and wide, even to the point of attracting the attention of a very important dignitary. His name was Hakim, and he ruled over the nearby city with an iron fist. He heard rumors of Lala Halima and her magical cooking, and he became intrigued. He decided to visit the old woman and try her famous tagine for himself. Now, this is a pivotal moment in our story. Hakim was a good man, a kind man, and he ruled fairly. He had never suffered a day in his life. He had never experienced any real hardship. So when he entered Lala Halima's house and ate her tagine, nothing happened. He didn't cry, he didn't break down, he didn't spill his guts. The old woman watched this unfold and she was furious. It took her hours to prepare that dish, hours to coax the jinn into it, to infuse it with their power, and it did nothing. Hakim just sat there smiling, completely unaffected. Enraged, the old woman grabbed a chunk of bread and flung it at him. She screamed at him to get out, to leave her alone. Poor Hakim, he was shocked. He didn't understand. What had he done? Was it the food? Was it something he said? Why was the old woman cursing at him? He left the house, confused and hurt, and that's when things got really dark. You see, Hakim, being the good man that he was very well liked. People loved him, and when he told them about his encounter with Lala Halima, they were shocked. They couldn't believe that someone would mistreat a guest, especially a man of Hakim's stature. They wanted justice, and before you knew it, a mob had formed outside the old woman's house. They kicked down her door and stormed inside. She was terrified. She hid under her bed, but they found her anyway. And here's where things get really crazy. As they were marching her through the market, the old woman dropped dead right there in the street. But that didn't stop the crowd. They kept on beating her lifeless body. When Hakim saw this, he stepped in front of the mob. He told them that it wasn't their place to judge her, that they had to show mercy. But the townspeople wouldn't listen. They continued to hurl curses at the old woman, and Hakim, fearing for his own safety, fled. Later that night, when the town had fallen silent and everyone had gone home, Hakim returned to the marketplace. He saw the old woman lying there still, her body mutilated, her eyes vacant. He felt sorry for her, so he went over and closed her eyes. That's when he noticed something. On her chest there was a small bump, almost like a birth. Hakim put his fingers on it, and it was then that he felt a surge of energy. He pulled his hand away quickly, as if burned, and he stared at his fingers in disbelief. They were shaking. That night Hakim couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, and the more he thought about it, the more he was convinced that the old woman was a witch. The next morning he assembled a group of men and went back to Lala Halima's house. They searched everywhere, but they couldn't find anything. There was no sign of a struggle. The house was empty. Hakim assumed that she had run away, so he decided to return to the city. As he walked through the marketplace, he stopped in his tracks. There, sitting on a vendor's table, was a clay tap. Its conical lid was steaming gently, and the smell was intoxicating. Meat, saffron, olives, lemon. Hakim didn't think twice. He grabbed a chunk of bread and dipped it into the fragrant broth. It tasted like heaven. The flavors danced on his tongue, teasing, tormenting, pulling at something deep within him. And as he ate, he felt a sudden urge to confess his deepest secret, his darkest sin. It poured out of him, and he felt lighter, freer, but also exposed, vulnerable. When he finished, the old woman smiled faintly. "You must rest now." Hakim did as he was told, but around midnight he was woken by a strange noise. The whispering voices, exactly like the ones he'd heard in the old woman's house, surrounded him. Panicked, he tried to escape, but they were everywhere. Trapped and helpless, he turned to the hearth and watched in horror as the tagine lid rose slowly on its own. Inside wasn't food, it was moving, squirming. Chunks of something unrecognizable glistened in the moonlight. Wet, pale, human. Hakim tried to scream, but his voice failed him. And that's when Lala Halima's familiar voice rang out from the corner. "It only tastes good to the broken-hearted." That's when the jinn come to feed. Like the poor man before him, Hakim fled the house barefoot in the rain and never returned. In the end, there were no witnesses to Lala Halima's death. No one except for Hakim, but he couldn't speak of it. The shame was too great. So the legend lives on. Hikers passing through the town beware the old woman's curse, the jinn in the tagine, always hungry for more.